Hey friends, it's Dimitri with Rubashka Streetwear. So here's the last installment of the how to create a logo, part 3, and this is going to be more the technical details. We are going to talk about the goals, things that you want to avoid when making a logo, and trademarking, kind of legal things. And I'll also explain the theory behind my logo and some other technical aspects about it throughout each of these 3 things. So the first goal of your logo is communication. That is what all logos and symbols and trademarks and all that kind of stuff, that's all what they do. You're trying to say something to the customer. So I mentioned this in the previous videos that you want your logo to be memorable and evoke emotions, right? And you can basically do this in an abstract way, abstract or direct. So what do I mean by that? So there's different types of logos that they have basically an abstract symbol to represent their brand. A good example of this for clothing is Arc'teryx. I think I said that right. That's a hard word to say. But yeah, they make really like high-tech rain jackets, and they have basically their symbol is a fossilized bird. It's like a skeleton of a prehistoric bird. And that's basically an abstract way of representing their brand. That bird has nothing to do with clothing. Even if you look at it, you might think at first, oh, is it is it a museum? Is it archaeology? Is it fossils? Something like that. So your logo doesn't necessarily have to be 100% what you're selling. In my case, mine is very, very direct. So Rubashka is just a common Russian word. It just means like a, button-up shirt. And so that's a piece of clothing. It's like a staple piece of clothing for men. And if someone knows Russian and they're a speaker and they see that logo, they are immediately conjuring up images or the imagery of clothing, right, in their head. And they probably can guess that that's probably something that I am selling, clothing, right? And that is also a direction that you can take your brand in that way as well. It's more of a formal and easy and to the point way to do it, but I think doing it in an abstract way is a little bit more fun and playful in my opinion. But you do basically have to have a sort of a symbol or a pictorial logo in many cases for that to work well. If you just had a word mark and you just wrote a random word, it might be a little bit more difficult to do that, but you can still do it that way as well. So yeah, you're communicating. That's the goal of your logo, is clear communication. Now your logo, in my opinion, also should be simple. The more complex your logo gets, the more problems you might run into, especially with scaling and the way it transfers over on different materials. When your logo is simple, it's just more clear and easy to understand. And that's also, it's almost like a goal of logos in the first place to become simple, right? If you look at logos over time, they're getting more and more simpler because it's easier and more direct to the point to get to that communication with the customer, right? So I mentioned this in the previous video before with Starbucks. They used to have their siren in the center and then they had Starbucks coffee under it. But over time, their logo got simplified and they got rid of all that junk, and they now just have the circular siren, and that works really well to communicate their brand, right? And that's also an example of abstract. At first, they had these two kind of together. They had direct and abstract. You can actually put those together as well. You can do your logo, and then you can write like clothing company or apparel or streetwear, something like that. You can definitely have those meshed together. But in my opinion, you want to go more of this route, especially if your brand gets popular enough and it's well established enough. You can definitely simplify your logo down if it's possible. That's a good thing to do. I also think like with this that less is more. You don't need like crazy imagery and craziness going on with your logo to get the point across, right? Another goal is easy to transfer. So what do I mean by that? When you are having a clothing brand, your logo is going to go on lots of things, right? It's going to go on a neck tag, it's going to go on paper and packaging, it's going to be printed, it's going to be embroidered. So really think about how your logo can be transferred in certain ways. And I'll kind of use this sheet as an example. So here's my logo in a large way. And let's imagine this just printed on a t-shirt. Now, when the logo gets scaled down though, what is going on? It's typically what happens is like the letters in the logo, they start to cram together and it becomes more difficult to read, especially for your eyes. Your eyes can't really pick apart the letters. So let's say that you made a logo that is, the letters are more spaced out well, and that means kerning. That's the technical term for it, kerning. So if you are going to be having your logo printed really, really small, or like you have ideas for that, you might want to think about how your letters are spaced, because that could affect it, right? And that's another thing with transfers, it's scalability. Like I just mentioned. So what does your logo look like scaled down? Does it look like something totally weird? Does it look like something that doesn't make sense? Can you read it, right? Your goal is that you want it to be readable at all scales. Now, obviously there's a point where you scale your logo down too far and you're not gonna be able to read it. That happens with any word mark, any line of text, basically, is because our brains can't comprehend what's going on there, right? So another goal is black and white. So what I mean by that, your logo has to be able to be transferable in black and white. If it's not, you're basically limiting yourself in a huge way, basically. And that's kind of what this kind of goes on into this. Avoid this. So that would be gradients. Gradients or color. So I don't mean avoid color. I mean your logo can't be locked into, like, it has to be this color and it has to be this gradient. Otherwise, I can't communicate my logo in any other way. That's what I mean by black and white. Does your logo translate into black and white? An example of this, like I said, with the color, like let's say that this was my logo and I had this red in a gradient, right? And I was saying like, okay, this is my logo. This is what I'm going off on. But how am I supposed to translate this into black and white, right? You lose that information. So you definitely want to have your logo, have it in black and white, so as a staple of the logo, right? As of the brand, like that has to be a core of the brand. It's translatable in black and white. And this, obviously when you're making t-shirts and stuff like that, a lot of times your best sellers are going to be black and white t-shirts. So make sure that you can print your logo on that and that it works out well. It might be a challenge, like I said, this is a bigger challenge with a symbol or like a pictorial logo, right? Let's say you have this pictorial logo of a bear and you have like all these colors on it, all these shapes and stuff like that. And then when you make it black and white, it loses all of those qualities and it doesn't really make sense anymore. Like that logo does not transfer over into black and white. So if you have a word mark, this is basically very simple and it should transfer over really well. So that's a thing. That's a good thing. Another thing that you want to avoid is confusing imagery or like inappropriate stuff. There is inappropriate. My brain is not working well today with spelling. So you can go on the internet and type in like funny or inappropriate logos like accidental, and this is like, people post them from time to time. It's people that really screwed up and didn't think about what they're doing, So with confusing imagery or I guess controversial, a really, really popular example of this is a certain logo from the 30s in a certain country called Germany. You get what I'm saying? You want to avoid having your letters and shapes start to make that symbol. even if it's just barely starting to make it, because that's a no-no. You don't want to do stuff like that. And like I said, with the inappropriate stuff, you might have your shapes and your letters and your logos in a way that can evoke that, like that subliminal stuff. So you definitely want to avoid that as well. It's generally not a good thing to do for logos. Big thing that you want to avoid is too similar to others. You can run into legal trouble with this, and that is definitely something that you want to avoid. Go research, go look into other brands' logos and see if yours is too similar or it's like the same thing. Sometimes you might make a logo and literally someone has already made that logo. That happens multiple times with designers, especially if you're working off of a grid and you're using like blocks and circles and like very structured shapes. You can accidentally do something like that by making a logo too similar or exactly the same as another. So you got to do a little bit of research, and there's several tools online to help you with that kind of catalog and categorize logos by what they look like. So it'll help you to do research and avoid that kind of mistake. And another one, I already mentioned it, but doesn't scale well. That's definitely something you want to avoid, but I already mentioned that for you guys. Now let's go on to trademarking, the last thing. So trademarking is kind of important for your brand. I'm going to scoot this a little bit closer. But it's not the most critical thing that you have to do. Not required, I would say. But there's a caveat to that. Not required at first. When you're starting out your brand, you're going to be obviously a smaller brand. You're not going to be recognizable. There's not millions and billions of people seeing your logo, and they probably are not going to be interested in copying you and doing all of that, especially in a short amount of time. If you've been established for a little bit and you've already got the ball rolling, that is basically helping you in your favor from someone trying to copy you. So you don't have to get your logo registered as a trademark right away. And what that means is this. You can actually put the little trademark symbol next to your logo. I have it right here, an example. These two right here. And that basically, I think it's a good thing to do. It helps people understand that this is a brand and it's not just like a random logo or image or something like that that's just there. This gives it context. I think that's the really important thing about a registered trademark and a trademark in general, is that it's giving context. For my logo specifically, and I'm going to start going into technical things about this, the reason why this was very important to me to have this always attached to my logo is because if you are a Russian speaker, you know a little bit Russian, and you see this logo but it has no context to it, people will be like, why is that like shirt just say or why does that like sticker say shirt on it, or why does that hoodie say shirt on it, right? They wouldn't understand like what exactly is going on there unless it has these trademark logos. I think that gives it context and to people, so people know that it's actually a brand, right? It's a clothing brand. And that might be a beneficial thing for you to do depending on what kind of logo you have. But you also don't always have to put this on everything. Like if there's situations where you don't want to put your registered trademark, that's definitely something that you can do. I think it looks kind of cool, and especially on streetwear brands, I think it is definitely like it gives it more hype. And specifically with the registered trademark, this gives it more of like a feeling that is like a legit and real brand. So if you really want to get that kind of feeling down for your brand, like it's well established, it has legal protection, that's what this means. This basically means that you went with typically with a trademark lawyer, and your logo now has more robust legal protection. Obviously, any logo, any design, any image you make, it generally has like United States copyright laws, so people can't be stealing your designs and doing all that kind of stuff, and you can actually sue them and go after them. But doing this is basically registering it with the government, and it's on file. But you don't have to do this. This is expensive to do that. You're going to be spending hundreds up to thousands of dollars depending on what exactly you're doing and how many logos you're registering and who your lawyer is, all that kind of stuff. Generally more like, I think when I did it, I spent $400 to $500 on all that stuff going back and forth, and it took 3 months, and I had a trademark lawyer do that on behalf of me. So what they do is they compile all your paperwork and they send it to the government, and they're the ones communicating back and forth with the government to get your logo registered. And actually for me, this was kind of difficult because you can't register simple words and simple things. When you get down to like if I wanted to make a company called Rock and I'm selling rocks, like you can't really register that as a trademark. So what I did actually was I kind of worked my way around it, and I had to explain to them what I was doing. So I'm not registering this word because this is a simple word and you can't do that. I was registering the actual logo. So what I mean by that is the way the letters are presented, the way they're spaced, the font that was used, the making them bold, all that kind of stuff. I had to kind of explain those technical details because this is actually what I'm registering. And I guess it worked out because I paid for that and I got this, so I can legally use this mark. You cannot legally use the registered mark if your logo is not registered with the United States government. You can use this one, and that's what I recommend if you are trying to, like I said, give your brand a little bit more legitimacy in the sphere. Yeah, and this is just like it's an extra step. Don't do all this stuff when you're first starting out. You don't need to, and but you know, a year or 2 or 3 down the road, as you get more money and as you're more stable as a brand, this is definitely something that you should look into, and I recommend doing it to give your brand more legitimacy and more legal protection. And yeah. And the last thing I want to talk about, kind of as a bonus, is more technical aspects of my logo. So here's the first logo that I made, Rubashka. Now, people have told me that they like this logo sometimes even more than this one, but I'll explain why I went from this one to this one. So the reason why I switched was this would be a confusing logo to audiences that are already Russian. And the reason why is because there is several Russian letters in here that are, or there's several letters in this logo that are already Russian, that if you tried to say this in Russian, it would be gibberish. It wouldn't make any sense, and they'd be super, super confused. And if they also know English and Russian, it might be even more confusing because they're like, okay, it says Rubashka, but then why is half of it in Russian, half of it in English? And, you know, Americans have always done that kind of thing. You see it when people are kind of satirizing or kind of jokingly representing Russia. They use like Russian letters and English letters together, and it's been like a kind of comedy thing for a long time. I'm not a fan of that. I think it's kind of like a meme. It's kind of dumb. I don't really like that much. And that's why I went from this logo to this. This is in full Cyrillic, full Russian. It's cool, and it almost is like a symbol in itself, because if you are an English speaking audience or you don't know Russian, you don't know what this means, and the letters are kind of abstract and really weird and interesting, right? Like people that don't speak Russian, like they wouldn't really know, like especially like this is like basically like a B in Russian. They wouldn't know what that means. And this looks like a W, but it's not really a W. It's a different letter in Russian. So it kind of gives it like, it's kind of a fun, interesting logo that at first when you look at it, you're like, oh, what does that mean? That's like weird. It kind of looks like it's in English, but it's not really. And then obviously if you're Russian, like you right away will know it and understand it. And there's no confusion like with this logo. This logo, I feel like it did not accomplish this enough. It didn't communicate the brand as well, right? Now, also, one other thing with logos is that and with scalability is that if you don't have your logo, your letter forms properly kerned, and like I said, kerning just means spaced, what can happen is you can have scalability issues. So the first variation that I did of this, I threw this together and I didn't really fix one problem that I had, and that was the kerning between these two letters. So what happens when this logo gets scaled down, these two letters right here, they basically merge together. And especially when screen printing, like this is like a thing that directly ties into clothing, those become so close together when the logo is screen printed small that they basically fuse, and that looks bad as a logo. It doesn't translate well. Later on, I fixed it right here. It's properly kerned, and the letters, when they are scaled down, as you could tell, they do not mesh and merge together anymore. And that's an important thing with your eye. You know, it's like a subtle aesthetic thing, right? So when you're making your logo, make sure things are properly kerned and that they will scale well. Another scale thing is the registered trademark right here. When you have it like this, a lot of logos have it in a small section right here, and you scale it down, it becomes unreadable. It becomes a bubble, and it might kind of negatively impact your logo. So when you're scaling down, you do not want to include this all the time because it might not make sense. This is why I actually like the big version of it, and a lot of streetwear brands have popularized using it in a large format. I think it looks cool when it's transferred on clothing and stuff like that. You know, people have their logo and it's pretty big and they have the big registered trademark. I think it aesthetically looks cool, but the other thing about it is that it translates really well when it's scaled down. I don't know if you guys can see all these small details in the video, but I hope that, you know, at least that makes sense to you guys. So yeah, those are just some technical things about making a logo, some knowledge that I have that I've learned from my own experience, and I hope that helps you guys. If you have any comments or questions, leave them down in the comment section below, and I'll catch you guys later. Thanks.